Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Garsten, and welcome to episode 139 of Tales from the Beat. And the man in the box next to me is remarkably the only broadcast auto beat reporter in all of the Motor City, but you could also say he covered suicide, Dr. Jack Kevorkian. What a career from Dr. Death to the latest dodges. He's a legendary Jeff Gilbert of WWJ News Radio 9 to 5 in Detroit and was often heard on now the late departed wonderful CBS News Radio Network. Hey, Jeff, good to see you.
Hey, Ed, always good to see you as we used to see each other on the street all the times over the years.
Yes, we did, and it wasn't for anything illicit. Believe me, it was
No,
just to
please. Nobody would
talk.
confuse us for being streetwalkers.
No, I don't
No.
think so. And now, I don't make change. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's just get right into it. I mean, this is still fresh, very fresh. CBS Radio Network that you were heard on often doing auto reports for the network went off the air as of Friday. Just what are some of your feelings about that, and maybe some of the reasons behind it and the way things are changing?
Yeah, well, that was my first feeling. The world is changing. I mean, you and I got into this business. I got into business in the 70s. I assume you were around that same era
Yeah.
where, you'd have to wake up and turn on the radio the next morning to find out the baseball score if you weren't actually listening to the
Right.
game.
Yeah, yeah.
And things of that nature. You would have to turn us on to hear the weather report. Well,
Mhm.
we've got these phones that give us all of this information today, so things have changed. When
Yeah.
when I got into radio, every radio station had a network, no matter how small they were. They may
Hmm.
not have even had their own local news people, but boy, they
Right.
had one of the networks. ABC had up to six of its own networks at one particular
Yeah.
point. There was NBC that had a network. They were one of the first to go away. Remember the Mutual Broadcasting System?
Oh, yeah.
Your
I worked at
your old friend
stations.
Larry King.
Yeah.
That's where he got his start. So all of
Yeah.
this happened. Well, slowly but surely, this shrunk because essentially the only stations that would have a network now are stations that really are into news, and every
Hmm.
radio station is more specialized right now.
Yeah.
So, you might have two or three radio stations in Detroit that are network affiliates now versus before you might have had a dozen.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, to me, it's sad because maybe it's just because of, we're of a certain age where we grew up with radio and in our careers. And the first station I ever worked at in my life was a college radio station, which coincidentally was the same one. I was actually Al Roker's program director. I was a couple of years
Wow.
ahead of him, WOCR in Oswego, New York, and we were ABC Contemporary News.
Da-da-da-da, dun,
Yeah,
dun.
yep,
Remember
yep.
that? Yep.
That was a sounder. Yeah, it was a real rush if you hit the network without stepping on it because we were
Yep.
young and we didn't know what we were doing.
And we
But
do now, but go on.
yeah, I don't know. It's been a lot of years since I
Yeah.
worked on the radio. But yeah, I mean, it's to me. I mean, your station. I listen to it constantly, and depend on you guys do really such a wonderful job
Thank you.
and well written, well told, well produced. Um, I don't know. I mean,
Always looks better from the outside, but keep going.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's why well, that it's funny you said, Jeff, because when I started in radio and I was just spinning actual records, the
So
Super
did
60,
I.
the Super 64 Sound Survey. Um, yeah, you know how it is. It's like when you put up wallpaper, you know where all the seams are, and it kind
Good
of
point.
in a way it ruins the experience because you know how, what's going on in the background. But I mean, what do we despite the ability to get news whenever we want and all with all our devices, I mean, what are we losing though? I mean, by not having networks like CBS Radio Network and even stations like all news radio stations are sort of going away as well.
Well, I wouldn't say all news radio stations are going away. Understand, we are the true unicorn format. If you look at all of the thousands of stations in the country, there are less than a dozen that do all news.
Yeah.
and most, all but WTOP in Washington, are owned by the same company. So
Hmm.
it's a format that costs a lot of money to run, but brings a lot of money in. Nobody brings in as much as they used to, but
Yeah.
that allows it to exist, but only in the biggest markets. Nowadays, Detroit is actually the smallest market to
Is that
support
right?
an all news radio station.
Really?
There
Yeah.
were once days when LA and New York had two all news stations battling it out.
Yes.
Those days are gone. But in terms of information, we have moved from a medium where you might wake up and listen to one radio station that would give you the school closings, the news, the sports, play your
Yeah.
favorite songs, and do
Hmm.
all of that. Well, now it's specialized. I mean, I used to say that there's a certain station that I can't mention that has three call letters that are similar to ours
Yes.
that used to have all of that. I mean, big full
Hmm.
service stations. Well, they're a talk station now.
Yeah.
And now if you look at our company, Odyssey, has a cluster of stations in town. And
Hmm.
if you want news, you got WWJ. You want sports, you got 97.1 The Ticket. Feel
Right.
like an oldie, we got WOMC. Feel like country, we
Mhm.
got WYCD. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can get anything you want and probably an order of fries on the side.
Yeah, yeah. One station I worked at, we even gave the school menus for
Right.
about 10 different
Oh,
districts.
you work in a small market radio station?
Yeah.
One of the biggest program. I worked at a station in Fresno, California. Our highest rated program of the week was Radio Tradio on
Yeah.
Saturday mornings. It was like Radio
Yeah.
One ads. Well, you can't do that now because you got
No.
all these one ad things on the internet that people use. Same
Yeah.
thing, small market stations. I don't know if they still do this, but they used to run obituaries,
Yeah.
and that was one of the highest rated programming parts of the day because,
Oh, yeah.
hey, maybe it was an older demographic, but you want to know if that old friend of yours died. Well, now
Yeah.
you got
Right. Yeah.
now you got Facebook.
Facebook. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The first station I worked at out of college was in Fulton, New York, which is a little north of Syracuse. And we had an FM that was a big, powerful hard rock station. It was automated, but the AM station was a typical AM station. And as part of my shift, I had to do a half an hour of what they call, like what you're talking about, tell and sell. And then the second half hour was a talk show. People could just call in and talk about anything, but they didn't have a delay. And you were the only guy. But anyway, to make a long story short, this is how small the town was. I went a whole hour and no one called.
Oh, that can happen in big markets today
Yeah, no
because
one
people
called.
don't call anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was 1973, 74, and I start to wrap up the show and the phone finally rings and I go, "Well, where you been?" The guy goes, "Hey, Ed, this is Jim Gentile. Uh, we all got together and just wanted to see what you'd do if nobody called." And so the whole town got together and conspired against me not to call. Well, thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Well, just, what they say, even if you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right, yeah. So why
But
don't we swing into the
okay.
the whole auto beat here? Now you've been how first of all, you have to tell the story about how did you go from covering Jack Kevorkian, Dr. Death, and then get into the auto beat. It's quite a move.
Well, I came to WWJ in 1990 to be managing editor, assistant news director, and was running the newsroom.
Mhm.
But when I took the job, I said I also want to be on the air because I've always liked being on the air.
Yeah.
Well, push came to shove, and I was finally told by a boss, "You've got to make a decision. You're either a manager or a broadcaster. You can't be both." And I
Uh,
said, thinking of all of those late night phone calls as a manager, I said, well, I'd rather just be a broadcaster. And he almost fell off
yeah.
his chair because I think he was trying to push me out
Yeah.
of being on the air. So he said,
Right.
well, fine. We don't have any roles for you right now, but as soon as we do, we'll move you in there and replace you. Well,
Mm.
okay, I did. Well, at that particular point, when I went back into on air, WWJ had a long-time auto reporter by the name of Rob Marr. Great guy. Do you remember
Oh
Rob?
yeah, I sure
Very,
do. Yeah,
very deep
wonderful.
voice. Yeah, and
Wonderful.
and Rob had worked himself into a freelance gig where he was doing this and also this TV network for dealers, so he wasn't
Mm.
full time. Well, the guy who replaced me as manager had a
Yeah.
history with Rob, and the two of them didn't like each other. So all of a sudden, Rob is gone because he's not a
Uh,
staffer, and you can cut freelancers a lot
oh
easier.
yeah.
You
Hmm.
learned that from your auto industry days.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Yes,
but
very
anyhow,
much.
they had all this auto stuff they needed to do. And it was like, hey, you want to stake out auto negotiations? Hey, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, I was a manager. I was used to working 12, 13, 14 hours straight.
Yeah.
I knew the people at the auto show, so I started doing auto show features. So I started doing a lot more auto news.
Hmm.
And then we had a really great general manager by the name of Rich Homburg who
Mm.
decided that there was money to be made in the auto beat, that they could sell features. He was very into having newsletters, very forward-thinking kind of person,
Hmm.
and he put me on autos permanently.
Uh,
And you've worked for assignment desks, and
yeah.
assignment editors don't like reporters to say, no, I don't cover that anymore.
Yes.
So Rich actually, and God bless him, this was the biggest break of my years at WWJ,
Yeah.
finally said, you will not send Jeff out on a story that is not auto related. So that
Wow.
really gave me the
Wow.
wherewithal I needed to
Yeah.
build the beat, to contact people. Because, there are sometimes when you're doing this that you're not necessarily generating a story at that time, you're just
Yes.
meeting people.
Hmm.
And when assignment editors see that, they're like, oh, great, I can send him to a bank robbery. Well, they couldn't
Yeah.
send me to a bank robbery anymore.
Yeah.
So I went from being the guy who was constantly trying to stop being sent to these other things to years
Yeah.
later,
Hmm.
people at the radio station don't even know I can cover those things. So
Is that
nobody even
right?
asks
Wow.
anymore.
Wow. See, that's great because I mean, I got sent up here from Atlanta in 1989 to take over the CNN Detroit bureau, and Ted Turner, he put the bureau here to cover it because he said he wanted it to cover the world's most important industry. And yet, we would pitch auto stories to the producers in Atlanta, and they would go, "Oh, it's just another car story," and they go, "Well, that's why we're here."
Yeah, well,
But
see, I think a lot of times people on assignment desks, they understand what they understand. I mean, these are not
mm,
stupid people; they're very bright people.
yeah,
But the auto industry requires a little bit of depth that you get after you're covering it, that you
yes,
kind of understand how this affects people, how it works
yes,
people. That, if I'm
mhm,
talking about something in the auto supply base, an assignment editor's eyes are going to glaze over, but
right,
if you work for Delphi, Vistion, or a place like that, it's going
hmm,
to pique your attention. That may not be the
yes,
lead story, but it's something that's an important story and it matters to a lot of people. So that's what happened. But when you talk to a news desk, often news desks understand recalls,
hmm,
strikes,
yeah,
bankruptcies, and that's about it.
yeah. Well, it's. I mean, I work on both sides because I was a producer. Yeah, I started at CNN as a producer, so I saw it from both sides where I would reject stories and have reporters yell at
Right.
me for being an idiot, and it's okay.
It's
You
part
can,
of the process.
yeah, it's empathy. But so good. So
People don't realize that this
yeah,
business has a major case of attention deficit disorder.
yes,
The most
that's a
important
good way to
story
put
in the world now can
it.
be
Right.
totally meaningless 5 minutes from now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's a good way to put it. So, all right. So we started covering autos around the same time. Um, so different. I think about covering now. I mean, I'm long retired. I just do it
Now let me ask you.
freelance. Yeah.
Let me ask you. Were
Yeah.
you into cars as a young person?
Not really.
Yeah,
Not really.
neither was I. But
Yeah.
I'm going to say this to set up a theory of mine. Is there are two
Yeah.
types of auto reporters, and
Hmm.
you and I were in the area where you were a reporter first, and then you got fascinated by the industry and you covered it. And the other
Right.
group is people who were car geeks who
Yeah.
learned the reporting skills. And those kind of people kind of tend to hang out with each other on the beat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny you say that because people say, "Oh, you're an auto reporter. You must be a car guy." And I go,
Yeah.
"No." I said, "I like to use cars because t they take me places, but I no, I don't."
Yeah. See,
Eh,
I have found there's a niche for being an auto reporter who's not a car guy because most people who buy cars aren't car guys.
Right.
When I first got into the business, I thought, oh, I went to a race at MIS and all that, and that's not
Yeah.
really what I'm into.
No.
So I haven't done that. But most people who buy cars are not necessarily into it. So I
Right.
test drive vehicles and I try to
Yeah.
test drive them from the standpoint of, all right, what's it like to be a regular person who's living with this vehicle,
Yes.
not necessarily somebody who's going to take it at 50 miles per hour into
Hmm.
your average corner. But how are you going to do it? What are you going to go take it to the store? Is it
Right.
user friendly? Is there some little thing that really annoys you? Things like that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that we live with. I mean, I like to tell people, you know, I know what a supermodel looks like, but I have no
Mhm.
idea what it's like to live with them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that because I was telling we had on another auto journalist in our last episode, and we were talking about reviewing cars and how I was banned from reviewing cars at the Detroit News after I gave a positive review to the Saturn Ion,
Oh,
and my editor went, "You're the only one. So you
oh,
must be wrong." I said, "I don't know. It went. I hit the gas and." It was fine. I had no problem with it. And he says, "You're never allowed to do reviews again. You're obviously, not tuned in to the cars." I went, "I don't know. If I like it, I like it. That's
you know
all."
what? When I started doing reviews, it was about 97 or thereabouts. I
Mhm.
felt I had to be a little bit snarky at first because I
Hmm.
thought, oh, you got to be a little entertaining. And I
Yeah.
made some comments. I can't even remember what they were about a product that was done by Lincoln. And I got an email from some of the people who worked on it that was so sincere.
Yeah.
Can you please let us know what the problem is? We are constantly
Oh.
trying to improve it. You're a
Hmm.
professional. We respect your opinion. And, I was thinking to myself, all I was trying to do is be a little funny. And then I
Yeah. Yeah.
realized that in Detroit,
Hmm.
and it's not about the executives, but the
Right.
people who make these cars are also your listeners. So
Yes.
while you can be honest, don't
Hmm.
step over the line and offend them.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So, you look back to starting to cover autos, what, in the early 90s, I got here in 89. How much the beat has changed in just the way not only you cover it, but the way the auto companies present what they have. So, what have you seen? What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in these decades that you've been on the beat?
Less access to executives is probably the biggest
Interesting.
change I've seen in the last couple of years. It used to be that when the Detroit Auto Show was a big thing, we would all get at least a 10-minute one-on-one with every
Yeah.
CEO. You'd
Hmm.
spend a few minutes, and at least, I mean, they're not going to be my buddy. They're not going to give me any
Hmm.
close corporate secrets, but at least they know me well enough to pick me out of a lineup.
Yeah.
So you do that now. Now so much is done in Zoom sessions, or they may come to uh, an automotive press association event
Hmm.
occasionally, but
Yeah.
there's very rarely that opportunity for a personal touch to just chat with them and do things like that. So that's probably something I miss the most. I mean, there we could go forever talking about different executives, but there were
Hmm.
some people, everybody always liked to talk to Bob Lutz. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
he would always
Hmm.
have some great comment and off the air, even a better
Oh
comment.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Alan Mulally was somebody who would treat you like you were the only person in the world.
Hmm.
So there were always people like that. And then there were other people who were a little more scripted. So it was different, but boy, it's probably been a year, maybe even
Hmm.
longer since I've actually talked to an auto
Is
CEO.
that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I would have thought that someone, on the beat with the reputation that you have would have at least a little more access than some people.
No, I don't think a lot of people have access unless there is something specific that they want to talk about. I think the last time that we had major access with any CEO was when Michigan Central Station opened and Ford
Oh yeah.
let Bill Ford and Jim
Hmm.
Farley did a bunch of interviews. But other than that, day to day, and again, the auto show is not the extravaganza it once was, and I had some
Yeah.
health problems, so I missed last year's auto show. So there are issues that were specific to me as well, but it's
Sure.
not like it was.
And that's, you mentioned auto shows, and I think about how, especially the auto show here in Detroit, where it was a big extravaganza. Thousands, literally thousands of journalists from around the world came and they put on these multi-million dollar shows, reveals to bring out a new product. And I mean, how is that the way you approach just new product introductions has had to change as well, beside not having access to the CEOs, but just the way the companies are presenting new products and then the way you have to cover them.
Yeah, and I think they learned that maybe having people, having 35 different reveals within 3 days is a good way for your product to get missed, even though you've spent hundreds of thousands, if not
Yeah.
millions of dollars to get publicity. So now I
Hmm.
think they've learned, hey, we can do something specific, we can target it. A lot of times, what car makers do to introduce a new vehicle is they have what they call backgrounders. They
Yeah.
bring reporters in ahead of the reveal, show us the vehicle,
Hmm.
let us interview people and say, okay, the embargo, which is a time we all agree to hold to, lifts at such and such a time. And
Yeah.
honestly, that's a more logical way to do it. I'm sure from their standpoint, it's more cost offensive.
Yeah.
Back in, I think it was 2016.
Hmm.
The auto show season was starting to change then.
Hmm.
And it was my first chance to cover the Paris Auto Show. And one of the big stories that year was that was the first year Ford decided it was not going to participate in the big show.
Oh.
And Jim Farley was heading Ford of Europe at that
Hmm.
time. And I asked Ford, can I talk to somebody about it ahead of time? So I'll have an interview there. Just
Yeah.
happened Farley was in town and he was uh, met him at his office and he was quite frank about it. He
Hmm.
said, look, it's going to cost us $2 million to be at this show. We don't
Yeah.
sell a lot of vehicles in Europe and France. We sell most of our vehicles in Germany. It's just not worth it. For $2 million, I
Oh,
can
yeah.
get everybody that I want at my own event, have them
Hmm.
captive, and tell my story without having to compete with somebody else. And I think eventually everybody learned that. And auto shows are now big things for consumers, but they're not a
Yeah.
big thing for the media. But at the end of the day, it is all about us.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think about how much just social media, things, YouTube, webcasting, things like that have also changed that strategy. And you think about, I remember when Ford introduced a version, I was still at Chrysler then, of the Explorer on Facebook. And I mean, as a journalist, how useful is that to you when a auto company decides to reveal a vehicle on whether it's on something like Facebook, YouTube, whatever, online basically.
Yeah, I mean it's useful. I can do it. A lot of times they'll do a little session with us, as I said, a backgrounder ahead of time to
Hmm.
tell us things about it anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really bother me anyway. I mean, sometimes it's a lot easier to sit in your den
Yeah.
and cover something than have to crowd around a bunch of other reporters.
Hmm.
But it's just the way things are, and it's not going to go back to how it was.
No, and it really shouldn't. I know that when I was at Chrysler, the team that I led, it was this digital communications team that, I mean, we're part of the change. Or one day we just decided that, we could host our own webcast basically almost for free.
I will tell you that
Yeah.
Stellantis now does one of the best jobs of any of the car companies in
Hmm.
telling us about their products. I mean, they're one that traditionally do have the backgrounders. They bring people in, they
Yeah.
make some executives available, they give us plenty of time to write and put our pieces together, and it just makes a lot of sense. But going back to your job in corporate communications,
Yeah.
and you've been retired how long? About a decade
Oh,
now?
it'll be 10 years the end of July. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, think about it now as you're deciding who you want to reach out to,
Hmm.
who I don't want to say want to ignore, but maybe a lower priority. And
Yeah.
how do I decide who are the people that I have to get in touch with? And then
Hmm.
you've got all of these YouTubers, all of these influencers out there, and there are
Hmm.
some of them who have a lot of followers, some of them who may have a lot of followers, and you
Hmm.
don't want to insult anybody, but you
Right.
don't want to necessarily do the uh, Ed, I like cars are cool.com website
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
his mother and father as subscribers, but maybe
Yeah.
somebody some other day. So it's got to be more difficult than ever for a communications person.
It really is. And I think back to, when we had that blog called The Firehouse that
Yeah,
was supposed to be for, this is 2005, supposed to be only accessible to working journalists. And I had
which
to
many
vet,
people say is an oxymoron, but go on.
yeah, right, yeah. And I had to vet these people. And and finally I just gave it up. I just said, you know what, screw it. Everyone's everyone's got a website, a blog, or whatever. They're all journalists in their own way. So who am I
Yeah.
to say that?
Okay. Yeah. All right. You go back to the old days of the auto show where they would brag,
Yeah.
we credentialed 8,000 international
Hmm.
journalists.
Yeah.
Honestly, the number of people who covered that show, who were
Hmm.
really working to cover that show, was
Right.
probably in the hundreds.
Yes.
And you had all of these other hangers on,
Hmm.
and you would inevitably have somebody at a local TV station do a story about how Lexus is doing massages for journalists at the auto show. And
Yes.
people are looking at you like, oh, you're hanging out there eating bonbons, getting
Right.
massage,
Yeah.
where's the steam room, things like that, where we're
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
getting there at 7 o'clock in the morning, leaving at 9 o'clock at night. And, if we get a lousy piece of pizza for lunch, we're lucky.
Yeah, well, I mean, you remember, I mean, there was always the shrimp index,
Well, there was a
right?
shrimp index, but
Yeah.
again, usually the hangers-on would get in line first, and
Yeah.
I worked in all news. I'd had to do about 5 live shots a day. So if
Right.
I
Yeah.
couldn't get my shrimp in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
I'm going to the pizza stand outside and grabbing something quick.
Oh, yeah. I mean, tell me, I do live shots for CNN Headline News, CNN International, and then I don't know how many affiliates would say, "Could you do just one for us for our noon news or our morning show?" Right? And I'm sure
Yeah.
you can feel that, and so you're just standing there, just saying, I'll take one shrimp.
Yes, exactly.
I'll look at the shrimp and digest it mentally as long as I can have something. We're almost out of time, but I thought we just end with, as things have changed, you were talking about Bob Lutz and characters. You got chance to, I think we all did, come in contact with some real characters in the auto industry, and I'm just, I mean, who are a few of the ones that stood out for you and that they have some great memories of?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, Ron Gettelfinger of the UAW really didn't like reporters, but somehow he liked me. And
Yeah.
sometimes he would just call me out of the blue.
Oh yeah.
And I'd see my phone, it would say blocked. And we, hey, Jeff, how are you? It's Ron Gettelfinger, blah, blah,
Yeah.
if he had something to talk about. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was great. Okay, he had retired. And years later, I see
Yeah.
my phone, it says blocked. And I thought, boy, in the old days, this would be Ron Gettelfinger. Well, I picked
Yeah.
it up. He goes, hey, Jeff, I'm in Louisville. I heard you on the radio. You sounded pretty good.
All right.
Yeah, so he was interesting. Of course, Bob Lutz, who,
Hmm.
some of the conversations off the air, I wouldn't even repeat on the web, let alone
Sure.
there. And your old boss, Sergio Marchione,
Oh yeah.
he was always quotable. I remember the time you set up an interview with him and me, and we were
Hmm.
trying to do video, and he didn't realize beforehand I was going to video it. And
Ah,
he said, you mind if I smoke? Which probably was rare for him to even ask somebody if they minded.
yeah.
And I was like, no. And then you saw I was doing video, and it was like, sir, please don't smoke.
Yeah, Sergio was had some interesting times
Oh,
managing
yes.
his shoots, and many of which I really, even though the dear man is departed, um, they make for some great stories, especially if he didn't like somebody. And, so we'll save his memory for that. But I think that when you're talking about Gettelfinger, I know when he was elected to president for the first time, and I had to go out and cover the UAW convention out in Vegas, and he was pressing the flesh, and I was working at the AP at the time, and I went up to him and tried to get a comment from him, and he turned around to me and said, "You see, I'm working, boy." I said, "Yes." He goes, "What would you do if you were on deadline and I came up to you and said, 'Hey, can I talk to you for a while?'" I said, "I'd probably tell you to screw off." He goes, "Well, that's what I'm telling you."
That sounds
But
like him.
But then when he had the news conference later in the day, he looked at me and laughed. He goes, "I was busting your balls." He goes, "I'll give you the first question." So,
And that also sounds like him.
yeah, so it turned out okay.
There was one time right before the bailout, I
Yeah.
had gone to Pittsburgh for a funeral of an aunt, and I got together with an old friend. We're sitting at a Pizza Hut, and I've
Hmm.
been trying to talk to Gettelfinger because it was like the week before the bailout, and I wanted to interview him,
Yeah.
and he calls then. So it's like I'm sitting
Uh,
in a Pizza Hut. I could at least conference my cell phone back to the station and say, "Hey, record this." So I'm
uh,
sitting in a Pizza Hut interviewing him, and everybody around me is like that, listening in, going, what is this guy talking about? Because, of course,
Yeah.
the auto bailout was like the biggest story in the
Yeah.
world at that time. And they
Mhm.
were figuring something. I mean, we could do a show on how many interviews we've all done in weird places.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jeff, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I've wanted to do this with you for many, many moons. I'm glad we finally got our schedule synced up, and that we could do. We probably have enough to do a part 2 or 3 at somewhere down the road.
Yeah, anytime. I
Well,
We old radio guys like talking.
we do
Yep.
like talking. We got a lot to talk about, especially if there's a couple of beers in front of us. Maybe we'll have to record one of these with beers. That would be
Oh, there you go.
interesting.
You got a new sponsor idea.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, Jeff Gilbert, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for watching, listening to this episode of Tales from the Beat. I'm Ed Garsten. We hope you'll share, subscribe, comment. I'll be back soon with more tales. Take care.